Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the new season where now we can have Breaking Swipe Rhyperior in Master League, and I immediately tested it out where Master League arrived a few days ago. This Shundle Rhyperior I acquired from trade shortly after CD a few years ago, and I actually have used it before Breaking Swipe is put on Rhyperior, but it just wasn't that viable. Now it has Breaking Swipe and I think it's become a lot more versatile. And in this video as well, I had a few matchups where either me not throwing the charge move wins me the game, or either my opponent didn't throw the charge moves and win them the game, and vice versa as well when they made the mistakes or I made the mistakes. So I think it will be a pretty good video to just explore when to hold your charge moves and recognize the condition for you to fast move down and when to throw it. So for the first match, we had a Giratina on the lead and my opponent didn't throw the charge move for some reason, so I managed to win the lead. And then we had a Dialga mirror here, and my thought process was he had to throw a Draco to take me out, and in that case I could just bring my Zacian and farm it down. It's exactly what happened here, and my opponent is not switching out, which gave me a feeling that he's going to be weak to Zacian at the back, but actually is a Melmetal, and that's very common. If you lead Giratina at the front, you have two Dialga counter at the back, and I throw my Fusion Bolt, which does half, and here is pretty much just a raise to the charge move, and obviously my opponent is not going to debuff himself that quickly, so he's going to throw a Rock Slide. And I thought I'm going to lose this match because normally Melmetal really outpays Zacian significantly to the charge move. So I throw the Fusion Bolt here, hoping my opponent is going to make a mistake, and actually now I look back, my opponent actually CMP tie on the Rock Slide, and I think he can actually throw the superpower, because you can clearly see that the Dragon Breath is not going to be enough even when debuffed, and what's going to KO him is going to be a Fusion Bolt. So to get to the charge move faster would enable my opponent to win that match, but my opponent just stick to the Rock Slide, so I take the game. Second match, we have a Zacian on the lead. When you see quick attack Zacian, a lot of the times it's going to be double nukes, well charged and close combat. Normally I take the first one, so that's what I did there, because it's not going to be enough to KO, and the quick attack's not going to be enough to fast move me down either. My opponent switched to a Giratina, so I responded with my Dialga here and undercharged slightly on the Iron Head so that I can get a little bit more farmed, and I obviously expected the Zacian to come back in. So my opponent waited down the clock here, and actually my opponent brought in the Mewtwo, and I was a bit surprised by that because obviously Zacian has such a good matchup against Dialga, and my opponent here didn't overfarm either. He just threw the Side Strike pretty much straight away, so I knew that his Mewtwo is dry, and to beat Mewtwo on Master League, having shields is the name of the game. You can't really outpace it, and very few Pokemon will have higher attack than Mewtwo. And I threw the Rock Record, my opponent just didn't shield, so I immediately switched my Zacian, and my opponent obviously didn't want to get farmed down either, so I switched to the Zacian. And at this point I recognized that actually there is no reason for me to throw a charge move, and I recognized it a bit late. Now looking back I recognized it, but in that moment in time I threw my Fusion Bolt, which really is not necessary because my opponent had to throw two charge moves to take me out, which is going to 4-stage debuff his own defense. And if I throw the charge move, I just pretty much give my opponent a little bit more time to store the timer, potentially to switch back to the Mewtwo to clear the debuff. But luckily that didn't happen here, so my opponent threw the Close Combat, and I just fast moved it down, and I didn't have to throw any charge move, and obviously Mewtwo was very low and didn't have any energy, so I took that game. Third match against a Mewtwo on the lead. I normally switch to my Dialga right away, but because of lag, I accidentally overtap, reviewed my fast move as well, which is very unfortunate, but my opponent responded with a Ho-Oh. So I know that this is kind of okay with the energy lead. I'm going to throw the Iron Head, pretty risky bait here, but I'm going to bait. And my opponent obviously wanted to get off the Sacred Fire, so shielded that, and I in return shielded it as well. And here it's just pretty standard. We waited for 3 Incinerators to come through and then throw another charge moves, and here I did the Draco, expecting my opponent maybe will let it go, but my opponent actually shielded as well. So at this point I'm just going to let my Dialga go, because I know that my Rhyperior should have a pretty good farm down range from this health, and I'm just going to bring out immediately. Musclub is resisted, but normally it doesn't really matter against a Ho-Oh. You're going to have a really good matchup anyway. You resisted all of the charge moves except this one. Massive boom, and this match is suddenly went from being a really good match to a really bad match. Now I have a Mewtwo to deal with a lot of health. Can't possibly Dragon Breath down from this range, so I have to throw a charge move. And I don't have Crunch either. Running Flash Cannon on the Zacian is a consideration for the fairies, because Zacians with Fusion Bolt and Flash Cannon actually is incredibly reliable when dealing with the fairies that you see. Either it's Togekiss or Cernias or Zacian, but with Flash Cannon, I can't really deal with the Giratina, so I lose that match. But I would like to think that even with Crunch, I will have to throw 2 Crunches, and then the Mewtwo will just outpace me, so it doesn't really matter at the end to me. Next match, Rhyperior onto a Dialga. So normally my opponent will check the fast move and then switch out when they see there's a Musclub. Comes in with a Kyogre. Now you might wonder why I would switch to Dialga instead of the Zacian, because I always find that when you have a good lead and they switch to a Pokemon that is weak to the Dragon, they normally have the third one that checks Dialga quite well. So here I just had to go down a shield in case if this is a Blizzard. Take a surf, and hopefully we'll threaten a shield back with the Draco Meteor on the opposing Dialga. So here, Dialga came back out, and I fully expected my opponent to actually shield this Draco Meteor, because obviously the energy on the Dialga will be very threatening to the Rhyperior. But my opponent actually let it go, and I was just like, not quite sure why my opponent would do that. And from this point on, pretty much the game is over, because Rhyperior and Zacian are both incredible counter towards Ho-Oh. Of course, if they rock a Solar Beam or Earthquake, that's a different story, but most people don't. They normally have Sacred Fire and Brave Bird. So here I recognize that my opponent actually has resigned the match already, because they just wasn't shooting anything. So I threw the Rock Wrecker and take the game. So GG to my opponent there. We have the next game here. Rhyperior onto a Landrous. Another awkward lead, because we're not running Smackdown. Musclub obviously doing nothing. And I'm just waiting for my opponent to debuff himself sometimes. Sometimes I'll throw this Breaking Stripe immediately. But in any case, it will take 2 Superpower to KO. So I would just normally just let the first one go through and see if I can threaten a shield later on the second move. But then my opponent switched to a Metagross, which is incredibly awkward, because both of my Pokemons at the back are kind of even against Metagross, but not really a counter to it. So I brought in my Zacian and shielded this potential Earthquake here. I don't think any reason there is to bait me, so I just shielded this. And then my opponent here made a slight mistake. For whatever reason, he settled for a Meteor Mash, and I knew I didn't have to shield this. And I would just say, like, if you want to bait your opponent, at least throw the Earthquake, because at least you can threaten a shield or something. But in that case, I just don't have to shield anything. So a Dialga come in, I throw my Fusion Bolt, and then I have 2 Fusion Bolt loaded, so I'm gonna throw another one. At this point, I kind of recognize that maybe I have to fast move down, because if my opponent doesn't shield, that means that both of his Pokemon are pretty low. And here comes the Landrous, and I just decided not to shield, because if he uses a superpower, then my Zacian will have a pretty good time just Dragon Breathing down. And then my opponent here make another mistake. He throw another superpower. So that just means that I don't have to worry about charge move from the Zacian. I brought out immediately, and then hoping that my Dragon Breath will be enough to outpace this Dialga in terms of damage, and I did it. So took the match there, and just recognizing that the fast move was the way to go. Mewtwo lead. I don't like seeing it again. This time I didn't throw the fast move first, and then just switch right to Dialga. And normally with Dialga, you can threaten a shield immediately with a Zacian. So my opponent threw the Close Combat, and then I throw the Iron Head, expecting my opponent is going to shield. And Quick Attack obviously is not going to be enough to fast move me down, so I expected another Close Combat coming before I could throw my second Iron Hit. And at this point, my opponent is 4-stage debuffed, and this is a very nice farm down range for my Rhyperior. I can just shield once, and then that back to the even shielding scenario, and have a lot of energy to threaten the Mewtwo when it comes back out. So here comes the Mewtwo, and I immediately throw the Rock Wrecker. Sometimes it's a bit risky because the opponent might shield and you have a lot of energy wasted like here. But I just still think that it's worth going for it because now the shield is down for my opponent, and I know that unless my opponent has a very good matchup at the back, then my Zacian should be good. And turns out he has a Dialga. I keep saying Dialga because it's so used to saying Dialga, but it's actually called Dialga. And at this point, I think that the match is kind of over because even with a Fusion Bolt, it's not going to be enough. It's a very hard hitting move, but it's resisted. But my opponent, for some reason, threw the charge move here, which I just don't think it makes sense because he could just farm me down very quickly, easily as well, because it's going to outpace. And then now I have my Rock Wrecker because I got 2 or 3 Musclops through. This Mewtwo is in trouble, and I can just throw the Rock Wrecker and take the game. So again, like a slight mistake from my opponent there. If he just didn't throw the charge move, Dragon Breath me down, he will have an Iron Hand ready for my Rhyperior, and then he can bring his Mewtwo again and do another Side Strike, and I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So GG to my opponent, but mistakes happen all the time. Next match, Metagross on the lead. I like to catch this on the Zacian because the Metagross just really outpace you, and I don't have any ground type charge move to threaten either. So Musclop alone is not going to be enough. Brought out a Steel, so that's pretty good to see here because I know that my Rhyperior can probably deal with it pretty comfortably after. Opponent shielded, thinking that it could be an Earthquake, which it could be. Not Earthquake, sorry. Could be a Outrage, but it wasn't, so that's fine. And here I just wanted to throw a Breaking Strike right away. Maybe could have just tried to sneak in a Musclop there. It will be maybe a little bit better. But anyway, that's all right. I a little bit confused about the count there, so I throw the second Breaking Swipe, and knowing that like there's not going to be the charge move that threaten the Metagross anyway, so I think that's all right for me. And here I'm just going to fast move this Metagross down, and he threw a Meteor Mash. I decided to let it go, trusting my Dialga at the back to win the game for me, and it's a Yveltal. This is a pretty awkward matchup. Obviously, is all depending on whether I can call the bait or not. And with all one shield left on each side, and my opponent shielded first, and I just had a call the bait here. It's just a 50-50 call, and I called it right. It's a Dark Pulse. So then my opponent's going to charge me another Dark Pulse and throw it. But at this point in time, I believe that I have the match in the pocket because I don't think that the Metagross has any energy left. So here I just don't care about the timing of the charge move, just throw it right away. And I believe that I could outpace the Metagross when it comes back out. And GG to my opponent here, I take the game. Next matchup, we have our Rhyperior onto the Dragonite. Another awkward lead because I don't have Smackdown. So I switch to Dialga immediately, see what he has at the back. A lot of the people, obviously, if they have Dragonite at the front, is going to be 2 Steels type at the back. Most likely a Metagross and then Excadrill. But in my opponent's case, actually another flyer here, a Gyarados. You don't see that very often. So I'll throw the Iron Head here, and here just Dragon Breath my opponent down. So I took Switch, but it's still an awkward thing to deal with because Dragonite obviously has superpower now to threaten Rhyperior, and then the Dragon Claw to threaten the Zacian. So here I just had to think about what I want to bring out, and then bring my Zacian, and decided to take a Dragon Claw first. It's gonna hurt, but I thought that my Rhyperior maybe potentially will have a lot of play, especially if I can just take out this Dragonite and then permanently debuff whatever he had at the back. And they should have second Dragon Claw here. And then my opponent final Pokemon is a Metagross, and I was like, this is kind of annoying because I don't know with one shield left if my Rhyperior will be able to Musclop it all the way down. But my opponent does have a shield left, so maybe Rock Wrecker will do some enough damage plus the Musclop to take the game. Here, shooted the Meteor Mash, and then my opponent maybe recognized that there is no more Wink on here, so he top left. I'm not quite sure if Rock Wrecker will be able to put it to 1 Musclop range, but my opponent quit, so GG. Mewtwo next, again, switch to Dialga, see what he has at the back. And here my opponent farmed up to, I think, 7 Psycho Cuts and throw the charge move. So I know that he's want to pretty much just chip me down and then bring in his own counter to Dialga. Here is a Haxorus. Haxorus is very glassy, so I know that my opponent's going to shield this, but the annoying thing is that he has Breaking Swipe, and then the counter threaten both of my Pokemons. So here I bring in my Rhyperior here. No, it's bulkier than Zacian, but also be able to take the charge move a lot better than Zacian here because it's not a Dragon type. So just take out the charge move here, farm it all the way down, and then hoping that I will be able to deal with the Mewtwo at the back. The Mewtwo is a bit low already, but then it comes the Togekiss, and I know that this game's over unless my opponent makes a mistake. Throw the Rock Wrecker, didn't shield, brought my Zacian, but then my opponent, here's a mistake. I switched, he switched, which is completely unnecessary because he could just charm me down all the way, and then I'll have no more play with my Rhyperior. But Mewtwo came out, and he had no extra energy to come in as well. He was dry before he switched out, so I can just use 2 shield, farm it all the way down, and then now throw 2 fusion bolts onto the Togekiss and take the game. Again, sometimes it's hard to react at the spot when you're playing, but when you have a Togekiss and then you see a Dragon type come out, I'll probably just stay in. But GG to my opponent there. Next match, we have our Rhyperior onto a Metagross, another awkward lead. So we're going to try to do the same thing again, catch it on the Zacian. A lot of opponent actually throw it right away, so I'm going to just farm up and then do a Breaking Swipe, catch it on my Zacian, and hope that will lure out another counter against Dialga at the back. And here comes the Dragonite. Not exactly a counter, but he's going to outpace the Zacian to the Fusion Bolt. I let it go because I know that from this range it's pretty close to a single Breaking Swipe. So I'm going to bring on my Rhyperior here, and then throw the Breaking Swipe after 1 Muscle Up or just right away to debuff the attack on the Dragonite. And here's awkward range here. Not sure how many Muscle Up we needed, but I know the opponent from this range will throw a superpower. So I'm just going to shield once, have a long G come out on the other end, and hopefully can threaten the Metagross. So my opponent waited a bit and brought in the Snorlax, and I was a bit surprised to see that because normally if people run a Muscle Up Rhyperior, they won't have an Earthquake Rhyperior. So here I just throw the Rock Wrecker after the Breaking Swipe debuffed, and then hoping that my opponent will throw a superpower to take me out so that he can debuff himself. And it's exactly what happened here. My opponent threw the superpower, I brought on my Dialga, and here I just know that there is no way I need to throw any charge moves. The opponent is dry on the Snorlax, and here my opponent is going to probably bait me with Medium Match. I'm going to shoot anyway because I know that once I shoot at this, my opponent would not be able to get to an Earthquake. And here, throw this Medium Mash, and I just pretty much need to hope that my opponent is not going to get to a superpower because that'll be game over. And here, so it's just Dragon Breath all the way down, hope for the best, and you get a game. So another important recognition of not throwing your charge moves when you don't have to. There was no wink on there. There are 2 shields from the opponent left. You just fast move all the way down. Mewtwo lead again, switch to Dialga. There's a lot of Mewtwo leads on the lower elo range. When I play these games, they were around rank 16 to rank 19. So a lot of people are running kind of different team, maybe not the top meta team just yet. And my opponent there, seeing my Dialga came out and store a lot of energy on the Mewtwo and then switch to the Metagross. Melmetal. Now, I know that with 2 superpower, my opponent is going to be very debuffed. And with this much energy lead, I can pretty much try to threaten shields or take the switch back. So here's what happened. I throw a Iron Head, my opponent shielded, and then I was like, okay, it's fine, I'll give you the shield, give you the lead. But actually, my opponent throw a bait move on Rock Slide. I just didn't understand that. Like, why throw Rock Slide when you just don't have to? You can just throw superpower. It doesn't really matter if you debuff 1 more stage anyway at that point. So here, my opponent throws some energy on the Melmetal, brought out the Mewtwo, but at that point, the Melmetal is pretty low. And it's pretty good because obviously Zacian and Dialga cannot do much with a fast move on Melmetal. And here I managed to farm it down because I debuffed the Cycle Cut on the Mewtwo. And then now I can throw the Breaking Swipe on this Melmetal and then must up 1 more time. And Melmetal just completely ruled that match because it was able to take out Mewtwo and then able to take out Melmetal, and then now I have my Zacian onto the Giratina. I don't have Crunch, but I don't think it matters all that much anyway. because I also still have the charge move on the Dialga, so I can just throw this onto the Giratina. He had to shield, and then all the Dragon Breath is going to add up really quickly, and I just throw the Fusion Bolt right there after and take the match. So GG to my opponent there. Again, is the recognition of maybe throwing the right charge move as well, because there was no reason to really throw the Rock Slide there. It doesn't matter if you're deeper one more stage, and if I don't shield and it doesn't KO, it feels really, really bad. So GG to my opponent there. Hope you like the videos, and give it a subscribe and like if you enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one.